Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and today we're going to be looking at Preservation Evoker in Mythic Plus environment in terms of the guide covering everything from rotation, from stat priority, from talents, from the little tips and tricks. And again guys, if you enjoy this type of video, let me know if you like to see Preservation Evoker guide specifically for raid, and if there's enough demand I'll try and make that. And straight away we're going to start off again. This is my Preservation Evoker. This is mainly for Mythic Plus, and we're going to be talking about talent builds. This is a talent build that I've been using for quite a while in 10.05 because again, there's been a couple of changes to Temporal Anomaly, Resonating Sphere, or at least how Temporal Anomaly applies its echoes. Has been a pretty nice increase in terms of absorbs and everything, so I really like Temporal Anomaly in Mythic Plus right now. And again, this build here is probably what a lot of people might use. It is a damage build, but it also provides good amount of healing, it provides good amount of damage, and it allows you to use, again, we're running Natural Convergence and we're running Energy Loop, which means we're using Disintegrate when we don't need to heal and we have extra essences. We're going to use Disintegrate to do damage and get mana back, and this is great for a lot of Mythic Plus weeks, especially on things like Spiteful, where you're always in combat, so you don't have to drink that often, you don't kind of drag down the group. So in terms of the class tree, there's quite a few things that you can change around. So first of all, a lot of people try to pick up innate magic if they can. I have 1 point in here. A lot of people might actually swap away from this and put 2 points into innate magic. Again, it really depends if you need that lower cooldown on Renewing Blaze. Some people might even take points out of like stamina increase and things like that in order to get innate magic. It really depends. There's quite a few alterations here. If you need rescue, a lot of people are not picking rescue because it's very niche. But generally speaking, this is what a lot of people might pick. Again, if you're doing really high tyrannical keys and you might be like, hey, I don't need innate magic, I might pick something like, again, magic damage reduction, depending on like especially high tyrannical keys. And again, if you're doing raging weeks, you'll have to pick up overall. So that's something to consider depending on which week you're running. But I'm running this right now. I changed a couple of talents, but generally speaking, I think this is a pretty good class tree. In terms of the spec tree itself, I think this is becoming more and more as the norm for anyone who's doing high keys as Evoker, because again, provides good damage, provides good healing, because you have things like Life Force Mender and you have Life Giver's Flame, which again, this is the biggest difference between a damage build and a healing build. Overall, I think this is pretty good because you're picking up Grey Spears. We'll talk about this. I'm assuming you're gonna have 4-set bonus, because the 4-set bonus, you can fish for procs. And again, you're gonna apply a lot of reversions. Outside of that, if you feel like you need more healing because you're doing something like a really high tyrannical key, or you're just new to Preservation Evoker, you can get rid of these talents here. You can get rid of these and go into something like, again, you can pick up reduction on Spirit Bloom, because reduction on Spirit Bloom is pretty nice on bosses like Herja, where you might mess up your Spirit Bloom usage and you need Spirit Bloom to survive during the AoE situations and things like that. So again, things like Ruby Life Boost requires a lot of burst healing depending on which boss you're doing, the first or second. So you can't go this build. A lot of people might go with Spark of Insight. Some people might go with Power of Nexus, depending. Again, I think this is more of a preference choice, and they're going to go, again, Font of Magic. They're going to pick up Grace Period. They're going to, again, you can pick up Energy Loop. It really depends. You might pick up Time of Need, Timeless Magic. You always pick up Stasis, and then you'll go into 2 points in Renewing Breath. This is the healing build that people might use. I'm not really using this that often. The only dungeons that I would consider using this would probably be something like Ruby Life Pools, maybe if I feel like Herja is going to be a really big issue in Halls of Valor and things like that. But generally speaking, this is what I run 95% of the time in dungeons, because again, provides good damage, provides good healing, and again, you have a lot of ways of getting your mana back, so you don't have to sit down and drink. Now quickly, let's go to stat priority for Preservation Evoker in a Mythic Plus environment, and you can go down the rabbit hole of stat priority. And honestly, a lot of times I just tell you, if you're doing, or if you're a player who's looking to do like 16 keys and things like that, don't worry about stat priority. Pick the highest item level gear and you're probably going to be fine for majority of your Mythic Plus time. Item level is the king, and you're going to be picking highest item level gear most of the time, depending on things like necks and rings, because they don't provide your intellect. But generally speaking, this is what I'm going. Item level, crit, haste, verse. Now the difference between crit, haste, verse is very minor depending on which weeks you're doing, depending whether it's fortified, depending on whether it's tyrannical. So honestly, I wouldn't worry too much about it. You could just say crit, haste, verse are all relatively equal, and then my lowest stat is going to be mastered. This is a big disclaimer, and I hope you're listening to this. If you're not doing really high keys, if you're just doing 16 plus and things like that, do not worry about your stats. most of the time you're just picking highest item level. If you're someone who's looking to push really high keys with your Preservation Evoker, all of a sudden things like versatility, especially on tyrannical weeks, is going to be more and more important. Versatility is budgeted in such a way that if you don't need that damage reduction, you don't really consider verse that strong. Because it provides damage, healing, and damage reduction. That damage reduction can become really, really important if you're doing like a 23-24 tyrannical key and you really want to survive certain boss mechanics. So if you're not doing really high keys, versatility will drop a little bit in terms of your priority. Now, crit is a great stat because it provides a lot of healing, a lot of damage. Now, crit doesn't interact with a lot of your abilities, things like Emerald Communion, things like Rewind, and there is big disadvantages to crit in terms of healing because, again, it doesn't impact a lot of your healing abilities. But on the other hand, crit is really great for damage, and if you're watching this video is aimed at new players, but also players who are looking to push really high content, and healer damage is an important aspect of this because Preservation Evokers are one of the top DPS healers right now if you itemize properly. And then of course you have Haste, and Haste is just a great stat because again it reduces the cast of your spells, but it also reduces the cooldown of your spells, things like Temporal Anomaly. Again, it makes your class feel smoother, but you also have to consider that some aspects Haste doesn't really scale really well. For example, if you get Leaping Flames and you're about to shoot out a bunch of Living Flames on mobs to provide a huge amount of damage or healing, Haste doesn't really scale a lot with that aspect, and that is an important aspect of your Preservation Evoker in Mythic Plus. So without this video being too long, Mastery is one of the lowest stats because it does provide a lot of healing. It's one of your best healing stats, but it provides zero amount of damage. And if you're someone who's looking to progress high Mythic Plus content, you'll know that you need to provide damage as a healer. So a lot of the times you might stay away from Mastery. But if you're someone who's just looking to complete that plus 16 key, you're pugging, everyone's taking unnecessary damage, don't step away from Mastery. You might not care, you don't need to worry about healer damage that much if you're not doing really high keys. You can also go to Questionably Epic Live, which provides, again, a really good way of determining which gear to use both in Raid and Mythic Plus. And you can right click, you have to select Dungeon at the top corner, but you can right click on your Evoker and it'll give you your stat priority basically. The higher the number, the better the stat. So you can see Intellect is the absolute king, and then you can see Crit is doing pretty well, Haste is doing pretty well. Versatility is a little bit lower. We talked about the budgeting of versatility. If you don't care about the damage reduction from versatility, it's a little bit worse. But all of a sudden, if you're doing tyrannical keys where you really care about damage reduction, it might become as good as crit as Hate and Haste. And then you see Mastery being the lowest because it does not provide anything in terms of damage. So this is, you can follow this priority as well if you want. Again, this is still wild west. You can experiment with different builds. This is what I'm running as an Evoker who's doing decently high keys, and I want to provide good healing and good damage. Now, if we look at some of my gear that I have in Mythic Plus, you have to keep in mind, this is my raid. It's basically my raid setup to some extent, except I don't use DPS trinkets in raid because a lot of my stats are to do with Mastery, because Mastery is great in raid situations. I'm still progressing Mythic Razagate, but my plan when I finish with raiding is to change my Lariats to something like Crit Haste or something like that, change my gems to like Crit Haste or maybe Crit Verse to some extent, and see how much versatility I have. I do run Venom Steep Stompers, which means that I need to be very careful about which stat is the highest and which stat is the lowest. I like these two embellishments right now. I'm assuming that you have 4-set bonus, because even though the 4-set bonus isn't the best, you can still play around it in order to provide more healing and more damage, especially with Firebreath, Leaping Flame, Living Flame combo, which we'll talk about later on. So my advice is, or at least my plan is, to get out of Mastery in Mythic Plus situations, put it into, again, Crit, Haste, Verse, put it into Verse if I'm doing really high tyrannical keys, put it into Crit if I really want to optimize my DPS, and Haste is also generally a great stat all around. So I do consider Broodkeeper's Promise in terms of trinkets to be a very important aspect of Evokers. You don't need to have it, but the fact that Evokers do suffer from sustained single target healing, this can help out. Again, it doesn't have to be put on a tank. If you're running with like something like a Blood Decay, you don't have to do it. A lot of times they can heal themselves, but if you have something like a Hunter, they're relatively squishy, you might put it on them. So I think this trinket is great, and I do run a DPS trinket. I do have Rage Feather. I want to get a DPS trinket for House of Valor, the Eye of Skullwald as well, but again, the drop rate is really low. At least it's unfortunate. If I can pick up the Evoker Staff, it's great because it provides a lot of free damage. Same with the Ring. It provides a lot of free damage. Let's go and have a look at some of the tips and tricks that a lot of people might not know about Evoker, especially if you're starting to play this class for the first time. So, generally speaking, we talked about the talent build that I'm running, and I did have Rush of Vitality. Rush of Vitality, Emerald Communion increases your maximum health, and Emerald Communion, with Emerald Communion restoring 20% of health, so it actually scales on the percentage of the HP that you have. This is a really nice talent, but it keeps you rooted. Now, you can play around this because you can press hover and then you can use Emerald Communion and you can move. So you can pick this talent, but if you're doing Mythic Plus content, everything goes wrong, everyone's taking necessary damage, and you press Emerald Communion by accident, and you're rooted in a place and there's a swirly, you might be in trouble. But if you train yourself to always press hover and then Emerald Communion with this talent, you're getting additional healing, and this can be really, really great. If you don't feel comfortable with this, I definitely recommend taking Dreamwalker. But with practice, Rush of Vitality is the better option. And then you also have to look at hover. Hover, a lot of the times people use to move left, right, center, or whatever as a speed boost. But sometimes you just want the hover free casting. But you don't want to move, you don't want to go anywhere. You can just stand still, press hover, and you get the, again, you can cast on the move on certain spells. And this is a good way to do. A lot of people might not know about this in order to increase your healing and things like that on the move. Again, you have to remember, with hover, you can also cast Temporal Anomaly, which is also another thing that you can do. Outside of that, how do certain talents behave and how does Temporal Anomaly Echo behave? There's a big difference between, again, a lot of people are running Temporal Anomaly. It's also to do because Absorb is really nice. It also applies Echoes. Now, Echoes that are applied by Temporal Anomaly are going to be 30%. Again, Temporal Anomaly applies Echoes at 30% effectiveness. Now, this is increased because you're also going to be running Time Lord, so 50% of 30 is going to be 45%. So you're getting 45% echoes from Temporal Anomaly with Resonating Sphere, which is not bad. Generally speaking, by default, with Time Lord, your normal echoes are going to be 105 of the normal healing. So there's a big difference. There's a big difference if you need to heal a big burst, again, Herja, Ruby Life Pools and things like that. If you apply your echoes through Temporal Anomaly, just know they're going to be significantly weaker, and you might actually end up wiping because you assume they're going to be really strong. So a lot of the times you might be using your normal echoes for the big burst AoE healing requirements. Now, there is a big, how do I say, caveat to this, because you have things like Golden Hour. Reversion instantly heals a target for 15% of the damage taken in the last 5 seconds. Golden Hour does not care if your echo is applied at, from Temporal Anomaly. So I'm going to apply Temporal Anomaly Echo. This echo is only at 45% of effectiveness, but now I'm going to take damage. And I'm going to use reversion. Again, you have to take damage in the last 5 seconds. I'm going to take damage, I'm going to put reversion, and you can see here my Golden Hour healed twice because of the echo, and healed for the same exact amount. So that's a big way of optimizing your Golden Hour healing. You apply echoes on people, doesn't matter if it's going to be the strong echoes, doesn't matter if it's going to be the echoes from Temporal Anomaly. People take damage, you press reversion, and your Golden Hour is going to heal twice on them for the same amount, depending on how much damage they were taking in the last 5 seconds. Now, another thing people might not know about again, Temporal Anomaly echoes are weaker than normal echoes, but it also doesn't work like that with Lifebind. A lot of people will be running Lifebind. It is very, very important. This is the Emerald Communion ramp, and this is what a lot of people are going to be doing during Mythic Plus and raiding situations. You're going to be applying, again, in a lot of cases, you might be applying something like Temporal Anomaly. You have a bunch of allies here who are taking a bunch of damage. You're going to use your Temporal Anomaly. It's going to apply echoes on everyone. You're going to, again, a lot of times learn to brace yourself, Lifebind on everyone, and Emerald Communion. Again, in this case, I probably should have applied Hover and Emerald Communion because I have the talent that keeps me rooted. Now, the Lifebind that was applied from the echoes or the weaker echoes, it's not weaker. It's the same value. So all of a sudden, using or doing this combo is really great, both in raids and Mythic Plus, and you can do it with the Temporal Anomaly. Temporal Anomaly is part of this because, again, the delivery method of echoes is instant now, or it's very much improved. This is something that you will use in Mythic Plus environment and raid, and it's great to know. Another thing that I tend to use with Living Flame, because you have to remember, Living Flame is an ability that you can heal or DPS a target, and sometimes, again, depending on how you set it up, you might do something that you don't want. So I do use a macro for Living Flame, and you can see it right here. It's something to do that I will always select an enemy target when I press E. I place this macro on my action bars, I press E, that means I'm always going to be DPSing, which is important because if you're running Leaping Flames, you're running Fire Breath, you want to get the max rank of Fire Breath, and then you want to hit all of these mobs and it's going to do a bunch of damage. That is one of your biggest source of DPS that you can do. This is pretty huge in terms of damage. So what do I do when I want to heal people? So if I go out of combat right now, I'll show to you that I do have a click setup. So you can use the in-game one, but I do have a cast Living Flame red, shift right button. So if I need to heal someone, I will always shift right button to heal them, and I will always press E to DPS, and that is never going to be confusing for me. Again, you can have different type of macros, you can have shift modifiers and things like that, but this is how I set up my Living Flame healing and DPS combo because it is very, very important. Now, what is the basic healing for Preservation Evoker? What to expect? Evoker depends a lot on your empowered abilities, and you have 3 of those. So you have Dream Breath, which is going to be your bread and butter in Mythic Plus environment, because again, you're most likely going to be using just rank 1 or 2 of Dream Breath. And the way they decide on whether it should be rank 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever, because if you hold it for longer, it's going to provide more upfront healing and less hot duration. So, for example, if you're doing Herja right now, and Herja is only going to have AoE for a relatively short period of time, and you need big burst healing, and everyone's like 30-40% HP, you might hold your Dream Breath for a bit longer because you want that upfront healing, and you don't need a hot that's going to last for over 10 seconds. And that is something that you decide. Majority of the time, you will use Dream Breath on rank 1 or 2 because you just want that sustained healing. And Dream Breath, again, it is insanely efficient. It provides a lot of healing throughout your dungeon, and it might be one of your top healers in Mythic Plus and in Raid as well, depending on whether you're running the Echo build. Outside of that, you're going to have Spirit Bloom. This is a mouse over ability. You need to select someone and you need to cast it. In Mythic Plus environment, you will try to cast it to the max. Now, keep in mind, once you reach the last rank, you don't have to wait till the very end. As long as you just have the last rank, in terms of rank 4, you can release it. Now, this is why we're running Font of Magic, because your empowered spell's maximum level is increased, because it's going to heal more people, and it's just great. Spirit Bloom is going to provide a lot of healing, especially if you have echoes on people as well. That's going to proc Spirit Bloom as well, and they're probably going to be topped up. So, depends on which echoes, Temporal Anomaly and normal echoes. Outside of that, you're going to have Fire Breath, which is your DPS ability. It's also your healing ability, because you will have things like Life Giver's Flame. So, it provides damage and healing, and it also works, really importantly, works with Leaping Flames. Fire Breath causes your next Living Flame to strike an additional target per empowered level. So the more empowered Fire Breath you have, let's say in this case we're going to cast it at max rank, your Leaping Flames is going to have 4 stacks. So now your Leaping Flames can do healing or damage. And this is going to be very important because it also works with your 4-set bonus and things like that, so it provides a lot of healing or damage depending on how you view it. So you have your basic abilities here. You have your empowered abilities. You also have your filler ability, which is Living Flame. Living Flame can be used to DPS or heal. And it also works with your Leaping Flames talent, which provides additional healing or damage depending on how you're going to use it. So, you're not going to use Emerald Blossom all that much because this is an echo build that majority of people are running, and most of the time you will be spending your essences on things like Echo. Outside of that, you will have a lot of cooldowns, a lot of defensives. Time Dilate is insanely strong. If you pop it on someone, it's basically just provides stagger. It is very strong. Use it as much as you can unless your tank calls for it. You have Stasis, you have Tip the Scales, you have Rewind, and you have Emerald Communion. These are what I call pure HPS throughput cooldowns that you can optimize. And again, in order to optimize them, it's going to be relatively awkward. We're going to talk about Stasis in order to get max value out of it, or at least how I get it. And then you're going to have Zephyr. Zephyr is basically avoidance for your group, and it's going to be really strong, especially for tyrannical weeks where you feel like the party is going to die. For example, in things like Academy, when you're doing the bird boss, you can basically stay extra long during the bird boss phases because you're going to apply Zephyr and people are not going to die. Again, you can mess around with this. Do not forget to use Zephyr in Mythic Plus. It is insanely strong, and one of the things that separate Preservation Evoker from something like Restoration Druid. And how do I start Preservation Evoker healing in Mythic Plus content? A lot of times I might use Temporal Anomaly to apply echoes on everyone in the group, and then I'll use Reversion. If people are taking damage, I can use Reversion then, and that is also going to proc your Golden Hour. But this is how I'm going to be fishing for my 4-set procs. I'll be doing damage because nothing is really happening. Again, I got the 4-set proc. This is going to increase the damage of my Living Flame. It's going to make it instant cast. It's going to increase also the healing. And on top of that, I'm also running, again, you have to remember, I'm running 2 points in Grace Period, which your healing is increased by 10% on targets with your Reversion. And if I have mana issues, I'll be using Disintegration in order to get some mana back, so I could use my Temporal Anomaly a bit more. If you're spamming Temporal Anomaly all the time, you will have mana issues, so I don't really recommend that. But if nothing's really happening, Temporal Anomaly and applying reversions on people and fishing for those 4-set procs in order to increase your damage is something that can be really potent during your downtime. How do I use my Fire Breath in Mythic Plus dungeons? Again, you have to remember Fire Breath is going to be a source of your healing and DPS depending on which talents you're playing. But generally speaking, if I'm approaching a large trash pack here with a number of mobs, I'll cast Fire Breath to max level because it's going to proc them. Again, it's going to proc my Leaping Flames, and then my Leaping Flames, I can use Living Flame. Again, if nothing's happening in terms of my allies, if they're not taking any damage, I'm going to use Living Flame to DPS, and that is going to jump to multiple enemy targets, and it also works with your foresight bonus. So just an example of how I might approach a certain trash bag pull when there's nothing really happening. I'll use my Temporal Anomaly because it's going to apply echoes. The echoes that I applied here, I'm going to use Reversion. Again, this is increasing my chance of foresight proc. So now I'm just casting my Living Flames right now. Okay, I can cast my Fire Breath max rank here. There's multiple mobs here. Assume there's multiple mobs, and then I'll use my Living Flame, and this Living Flame would have jumped on all the enemies if there were enemies. Now, if I'm only approaching a single target mob and there's nothing happening at all, no one's taking any damage, nothing's happening, I might just cast one rank of Fire Breath because I want to go back to doing other things. Again, it depends if I have to move swirlies and things like that. But if people are taking damage in my group and I'm facing one target, like right now, I'll cast max rank of my Fire Breath if I can do it, and then I'll use my Living Flame on allies, and it's going to jump on allies and heal them. And if I had my Foresight, it would have worked with that as well. So the rank of my Fire Breath depends on two things. How many enemies am I facing? And do I need to heal allies in my group? Because after I get my, again, Fire Breath ranks, I'll decide, do I do damage with Living Flame or do I heal with Living Flame? So let's talk about the different schools of thought when it comes to AoE healing and group healing for Preservation Evoker. And there are multiple ways of providing healing. Again, your Dream Breath is really powerful, and you can use Verdant Embrace into Dream Breath, and that's going to, again, Call of Viscera is going to make your Dream Breath stronger. You can do that for Living Flame as well, and we'll talk about single target healing. But generally speaking, let's say there's going to be a lot of AoE damage happening very soon. I'll try and apply echoes. There's no damage happening. I'm just going to keep DPSing. There's nothing really happening. I apply echoes on people. Again, you have to remember, normal echoes are far more powerful than temporal anomaly echoes. But so I'm basically preparing for the ramp. So let's say I have echoes on nearly everyone and AoE damage is about to happen. I'm going to try and get my Dream Breath on everyone here. Again, it can be awkward, rank 1. And now you can see people have 2 hots on them from Dream Breath. This provides a lot of sustained healing, and you can just kind of go back to DPSing. Now, another way of doing this is using the temporal anomaly into Emerald Communion ramp. So I'm just gonna get my tank healed up here, and I'm gonna apply temporal anomaly. This is going to apply echoes on everyone, again reduced echoes, and then I'm going to use. You can use Verdant Embrace on your tank, and if you're standing relatively close to your tank, you're not gonna even jump to them, and then you're gonna use Emerald Communion. Again, if you're using different talents for stationary Emerald Communion or not, you might have to use Hover as well. But generally speaking, this is going to provide a lot of AoE healing. Again, Emerald Communion is a 3-minute cooldown, so you can't use it all that often. This is something that you're preparing for the ramp. Outside of that, a lot of people might be using, hey, they're going to be applying echoes. Again, you can fish for Essence Burst by using Living Flames. Again, I use Living Flames. I got my Essence Burst proc. I can apply more echoes. I'm going to apply echoes. I'm going to apply echo on this. And they might just use Verdant Embrace to just provide burst healing on certain situations. Verdant Embrace is going to be very powerful, especially if you use it with powerful echoes. It provides a lot of burst healing. So just a summary of some of the gameplay here. There's a lot of ways of applying healing depending on which type of healing you need to do. A lot of times people will be running Temporal Anomaly and putting reversions on people just so they can get the Foresight bonus procs. And the Foresight bonus, Living Flame, can be used to heal people or DPS. That is pretty nice, especially on low healing content. Outside of that, people might be preparing for AoE healing. They might be applying echoes and they might be using Dream Breath. You can use Verdant Embrace into Dream Breath to have a more powerful Dream Breath. Keep in mind that if you do, and this is the case, let's say you apply Verdant Embrace, this is going to be a powerful Dream Breath, and then you apply echoes, and then you use your Dream Breath. The first Dream Breath hot is going to be empowered by a Verdant Embrace, and you can see it in the logs here, it's ticking for a lot more. The second Dream Breath is not that was echoed, even if it was echoed by a strong echo, it's not going to be empowered by Verdant Embrace. And you can see it here, you have one for 9,000, then 6,000, 9,000, then for 6,000. That's something to keep in mind, which is kind of sucks. If you run out of cooldowns, you still have Spirit Bloom. Spirit Bloom is also something that's really, really important. You want to cast it to max rank because it will provide a lot of healing, especially during situations when everyone takes a lot of damage. If you need single target healing, don't be afraid to use Spirit Bloom rank 1 just on the tank by themselves. Now let's talk about some of the stasis usage and things like that. Stasis is pretty much a staple for raids and Mythic Plus, and you probably have to start and getting used to stasis because it does provide a lot of complexity. I don't expect anyone to really... You're going to make mistakes with stasis. because it basically locks you in for the duration of stasis to use only the good abilities. So if someone takes unnecessary damage and you need to use something like Living Flame, you all of a sudden you're like, ah, now I have Living Flame in this. Or for example, if you have Leaping Flames, if you use Fire Breath and you have Leaping Flames, and let's say you have stasis running, and then you launch your Living Flames on somebody or on a tank or healing for DPS, it might mess up your stasis and it's going to be very awkward. So be very careful. A lot of times when I'm applying stasis or I'm about to do stasis, I'll be like, hey, do I have Leaping Flames or do I not? Because I try to activate stasis when I don't have Leaping Flames. Just to showcase the most default basic build for stasis that a lot of people are using right now, and it's going to be, you activate stasis, you activate Verdant Embrace. Verdant Embrace is going to provide you a more powerful Dream Breath. Use Dream Breath and then you use max rank Spirit Bloom, because again, stasis remembers ranks. So now I have Verdant Embrace, I have Dream Breath, and then I have Spirit Bloom, and if people are taking damage, again, Dream Breath is going to shoot out from you, so you need to make sure those hunters and pesky mages, you need to stand behind them or close to them, and then you activate it. And then you can see most of the people got Dream Breath, they were a little bit further ahead. But generally speaking, this is a decent way to provide burst healing that also provides sustained healing, because your Dream Breath is going to be empowered by Verdant Embrace. It is also important to note that I said a lot of people are going to mess up stasis, because a lot of the times people will activate stasis when the damage is already happening. So they're going to be building up their stasis, and then all of a sudden there's nothing happening and stasis is going to pop off when, again, all overhealing. A lot of the times you'll have to prep your stasis before damage happens, again, you can prep stasis for single target, you can prep stasis for AoE, but the knowledge of the dungeon, the knowledge of the bosses is going to be extremely necessary to make good use of stasis, because generally speaking, a lot of people will be like, hey, everything went wrong, everyone's 20% HP, I'm gonna pop my stasis, I'm gonna use my Verdant Embrace, Dream Breath, or Spirit Bloom, or whatever, and then everyone's full HP, and then you have your stasis that is loaded with really good abilities, but nothing is gonna happen in the next 30 seconds. And all of a sudden you're like, why did I even use it? So the knowledge of the boss fights is basically mandatory to get a good use of stasis. So let's have a look at some other stasis usages that I'm trying to do. Again, this is more for raid, and again, this is a video for Mythic Plus, but I do experiment this once in a while. I do tend to use, again, we're gonna use stasis right now. We're gonna use, again, we're gonna use Verdant Embrace, we're gonna use Dream Breath because I really love this combo, and then I might use something like Temporal Anomaly. I'm going to be prepping for example, I might be using Verdant Embrace after the Temporal Anomaly to apply Life Bind on everyone, and then use Emerald Communion, and this is going to provide a lot of sustained healing from Dream Breath and then sustained healing from Emerald Communion. You might be asking yourself, like, what? Dream Breath is going to proc my Temporal Anomaly echoes. It doesn't, because of the order and things like that. So if I'm going to proc it right now, Dream Breath is going to shoot out, then my Temporal Anomaly shoots out, applies echoes on everyone, then I use Verdant Embrace, and then I use my Emerald Communion. And this kind of, like, this is something that I've been experimenting with. This kind of combo provides insane amount of sustained healing for a decent amount of, or decent period. And again, I'm not saying this is the best, I'm not saying this is the worst. Stasis is something for you to experiment with, because it has so many different usages in terms of which boss you're approaching, which dungeon you're doing. Let's look at the Mass Dispel Stasis. So the Mass Dispel Stasis, probably a lot of people already know about this, but this is very useful for something like Bursting Weeks or the first boss in Court of Stars, because you know there's going to be a magic debuff applied on everyone that you need to jump all the time, and on high rank keys that can be pretty awkward. But you can remove all of that, and you can use Cauterized Flame to remove pretty much all the debuffs if you want. But in this case, I'm going to remove this magic debuff from all the mobs. So I know there's going to be a magic debuff happening very, very soon. The most important aspect is to use stasis for Mass Dispel, whether it's going to be Cauterizing Flame or Magic Dispel, before the actual dispel comes out. There's nothing to dispel here. I activate my stasis, I dispel myself, I use Magic Dispel on myself, I use Magic Dispel on the Rogue, I use Magic Dispel on the Hunter. Again, I didn't use it on a Druid because they can shapeshift. So now I have 3 Magic Dispels, and my Magic Dispel is not on cooldown because I wasn't dispelling anyone. Now there's going to be a jump, or the magic debuff is going to come out in 2 seconds. So you can see it right here. It comes out. I activate my stasis. It dispels me. It dispels Rogue. It dispels Hunter. And then everyone else dispels themselves. I still had a magic dispel that I could use in that case. But that is the basic. It's a basic rotation on how to use stasis to dispel. Again, you can dispel pretty much anything, because you can use Cauterizing Flame in this case. You can use Magic Dispel. You can use it on Bursting Weeks if you know there's going to be an insane amount of bursting stacks and things like that. But it is very niche because it requires you to know of what is happening in the future. If you're someone new, you're gonna struggle with this, but if you're doing the same boss over and over again and you're like, hey, I can use stasis in this case, really, really, really useful. Now let's talk about Preservation Evoker and Sustained Single Target Healing. Again, this is one of the issues of Preservation Evoker, but you do have tools to battle with it. You have Time Dilation, which is insanely strong. You can use, for example, just rank 1 of Spirit Bloom just to provide healing on the tank. There's a lot of times in mythical situations where people might use Dream Breath rank 1 or 2 just to heal up the tank, just to provide a hot on the tank so they feel a bit more safe because there's no healing needed later on. Now, there are certain situations, I'm going to put my logs here as well. There are certain situations like in Temple of Jade Serpent where you have the third boss and he applies an absorb on a tank and it needs to be healed up instantly. It's not about sustained single target healing, it's about burst single target healing. And a lot of times applying echoes on the tank and using Verdant Embrace is probably what a lot of people might use to provide a lot of burst healing, because again, Verdant Embrace gets copied by echo. Again, you have to be very careful about using Verdant Embrace on a tank, because if you're really far away from it, you might jump over some bad stuff and you will die. So a lot of the times you have to be, again, what I do, if I know the tank is going to need a lot of healing, I try to stay close to them and try to avoid stuff with them, because I know I'll have to Verdant Embrace them, especially in Temple of Jade Serpent and a few other situations. But this is my overall guide for Preservation Evoker and Mythic Plus content. There's a lot of things that I could have included in this. I know this is a really long video. I know that I went through stasis, I went through single target usage, I went through stats, I went through talent builds. You can change your talent build for a more healing intensive build. You can do a lot of different things. Preservation Evoker, the amount of healing that you do, the amount of damage you can do, it's really, really good. You're very cooldown dependent healer. You depend on your Dream Breath, you depend on your Spirit Bloom, you depend on echoes, and again, your Temporal Anomaly is great. It's especially great for providing absorbs and providing echoes, but the echoes that you provide from Temporal Anomaly are not really that amazing if you need really big, strong healing. But there are ways to go about this. Again, we talked about Golden Hour doesn't really get affected by that. We talked about Lifebind doesn't really get affected by the weaker echoes, so you can have really strong Emerald Communion ramps. So there's way to go around the Temporal Anomaly echo problem. So hopefully this video has helped you a little bit. If you have any comments about new builds or new tips and tricks that I missed out on, because it is a new class, there's new builds, or how to say new ways of optimizing this healer coming out every week. Let me know if I missed out on something. Again, let me know if you have a new build, and if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and if you want to see the raid version of this video, let me know. Thank you guys, and I'll see you in my next guide.